Welcome to the Monetary Mixtape with Will Hoffman, founder of Hoffman Wealth Management. In this podcast, we help fellow Gen Xers simplify complex wealth issues that are important to Gen X. We do this by cutting out the mundane material and using a refreshing approach to finances in a way this skipped generation appreciates. Join us for this ride where we explore financial planning and wealth management as Will Hoffman draws from almost 20 years of experience and brings to you qualified guests to help be your latchkey to tricky monetary affairs.
Welcome to Monetary Mixtape with your host, Will Hoffman, where we talk about the ever-forgotten Generation X. I'm Wendy McConnell. Hey there, Will. How are you?
I'm great, Wendy. How are you today?
Oh, I am feeling good. So
Good.
We have a guest today?
Yes, we have a guest, and I don't want to delay much because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to talk about. So we have with us Eve Simon. Eve is from the podcast and group GenX Stories. Welcome to the show, Eve. How are we doing today?
Doing okay. I'm really grateful to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Really looking forward to the conversation. Eve and I had a great discussion a few months ago when we met one another, did a quick Zoom session, and then we're going to talk about the sandwich generation, us being the sandwich generation, both because we're kind of sandwiched between boomers and millennials, which everybody else likes to talk about. In addition to that, we are in a pretty unique position with our generation right now because we are raising our kids and running them everywhere. We were just talking about the last few weeks of May and the tireless track meet that becomes with running kids everywhere and getting teachers gifts and all that stuff. But we're also starting to be in a position where we have to help out with our parents a lot more. They're having physical ailments, unfortunately dealing with health problems. And that was kind of what Eve and I talked about. And ironically, it took us a while to get this scheduled because we were in a sandwich ourselves, right? I was taking care of kids. And Eve, what did you have going on?
Well, I think you and I talked probably a couple months after my father passed away.
Yes.
So that I'm an only child, so that is all consuming. And my father passed away September 11th to 2022. And I don't think I'm ever going to be over it, but in the immediacy of the couple months, a lot of, as you said, financial stuff, a lot of structural things we need to deal with, but there's also the feeling of grief that you have to sort of square with everything else. And that's when you and I started to talk.
Right. Talked about that. And then you ended up, helping out with your mother for a little bit there too, right?
Yeah, because, universe can't give us a year. So my mother at the end of March fell and fractured her hip.
Oh, man.
And so she's a very, very active 80. And she actually got up from the fall and then eventually went to the hospital and they found a break and she had to have the surgery with the 3 screws that go into the hip bone. And I was, until just recently in Philadelphia where she lives, trying to keep her sitting in her chair.
Yeah, that's the tough part with our folks right now. Both of my parents are very, very active. So, keeping track of them kind of takes them back to thinking about them trying to keep track of me when I was a kid. And don't envy their position at all.
Someone actually reminded me when I was really having issues with mom. I mean, again, I've been helping mom with finances and I've been helping mom with all the details following dad's passing. But in this specific thing, she is tricky. And a friend of mine reminded me, she changed your diapers. You can do what she needs of you right now. And I'm like, okay, well, that's perspective. So
just tell them that they have to be home by dark. That's
right.
Tell
by
your
dark
parents.
before streetlights come on, right?
Oh my God, that's a good, I should have done that.
There's still time.
How is Mama Simon doing?
Mama Simon is doing great. She actually she had the surgery on April Fool's Day, and I really hoped it wasn't a joke. She passed. She's in her 7th or 8th week or something. She's doing great. She's still stuck with a walker, which for someone so active, and she was my father's caregiver, it is like she can't handle it kind of thing. And so half of my job when I was with her was to try to sort of say, Mom, I can do that for you. Mom, I can do that for you. Let me go do that. And she just has a hard time. I think that generation has a hard time relinquishing having other people care for them.
Sure.
Because they're so used to caring for you. So I'm 53 and she's 80. And she's like, well, you can't possibly do that. I'm like, yeah, I really can go get you a soda. It's okay. So it was an intense 3 weeks. We didn't deal with a lot of other sort of issues at that point because we really just wanted to make sure she was getting strong enough. But she's selling an apartment in the middle of all this. They had an apartment in Florida. And so they're trying to put it on the market and they got a bid. And so then there's all this like wrangling for how that's going to go and where that money's going to be put safely. And so she asked my opinion. She doesn't take the opinion often, but for the most part, for having happened within a year of my dad's passing, we are doing okay.
Well, and I know we talked a lot about your dad's passing, and that's what was the motive for this show. So first off, our deepest condolences. I know that's tough. That's a challenging episode to go through, and then with everything else going on beyond that, I know it's been an interesting and tough couple of months for you. So our deep condolences. And before we get into the depths of that conversation, can you tell me a little bit about GenX Stories and what was your motive there and what your passion for Generation X is?
It's really strange. I guess it's sort of our fourth season because adulting got in the way. So it became hard to do a whole full season. But I've been doing this since 2016. And it was my 25th college reunion. And I went back to University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And we all seemed the same. And we're all in our late 40s at that point. And I thought there was something to it. I thought that maybe it's because we're in the arts, or maybe we're just our generation is younger at an older age. I just didn't know. And so that became my thesis.
I love that. Younger at an older age.
Yeah. Gen X Stories became not people you were reading about in Fast Company. It would be regular people sharing their stories of what made them who they are. And, we say as a tagline, which eventually developed for the podcast, how the lost generation found itself. I like to sort of look back to how we were as kids and then sort of talk about what that has evolved over, 40 years.
Yeah.
It started as a writing project and nobody would write except me. And it was a website, and I was almost about to give it up. I'd gotten the domain. I did all that stuff, built the website because I'm a web designer. And then I heard about podcasts, or I learned about podcasts, and I'm like, well, I've never done audio. I'm not a producer that way. I'm a web designer, but I'm a storyteller. Yeah. So there has to be a way we can do it. Bought all the books, bought the microphone, did the tests, and launched the podcast. And as you expect, as things go and they change, season 1 was a test with one host. Also, she was in my bridal party. I'm actually now divorced, but she was in my wedding, and we'd known each other. I was married in 2001. So we knew each other since 1997. And it seemed to form a good basis because we knew each other as younger and we grew together. It didn't work out as well as I thought. And so the option at the end of one season was to end it entirely again, saying, well, okay, 2 strikes. It didn't work with a writing project. It's not going to work with season 1 of the podcast. Or find new people. And that whole story of when we were younger, learning about what we did when we were younger, and then who we became now, could I find people that slot into it? And our current format hit. And it's me and 3 other hosts. Courtney went to Penn with me. She's a year behind me. She's host 1. Chris went to graduate school with me. He is an art director, most previously of Conan O'Brien's show.
Oh, wow.
We went to get MFAs together at Brandeis University. And Lori, I met while I was looking for a job 3 years ago. And I knew nothing about her background. And I liked each of them individually. They all told good stories. Lori, for example, is a John Bon Jovi fanatic. And she is a 1980s freak. And we just sort of got everyone together to see what would work. They were all in LA and I'm in DC. And so we have to do this like we're doing with Zoom.
Right.
Somehow the 3 of them got along. And we had stories to tell that I hadn't heard because I knew them I knew most of them in college and forward. So it has somehow worked. They've all become friends. We support each other in all of the issues. Specifically, this last year and a half has been a lot of adulting, as a lot of Gen Xers have had to deal with.
Yeah.
And we've all had to deal with loss of parents or loss of family or divorces or all that stuff. It's been kind of cool. And then I went back to my reunion, my 30th reunion, which was 31st, thanks to COVID, with buttons, and said, hey, we've got this podcast that we talk about all this cool stuff. And people were like, I have stories to tell. So it's like every single time we pick a topic, we have a podcast Facebook group where we can learn about those people, all people about our age, sort of between like mid 40s and late 50s. And it's become a really exciting thing for me to learn about, that when I see all the things that are targeted to our generation, like ads, or I see TV shows that are trying to get our money, or clothing that is changing and going back to the 90s. Oh my God, the shoulder pads are just too much for me. But it's there.
They do make you look really skinny, though, those shoulder pads.
My mother, speaking of my mother, she still wears shoulder pads. And during the time I was with her when my father passed away, she took them out at dinner one night and she just put them on the table. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
Oh my goodness.
Right. So it's everything old is new again. Our generation is the one that has the money now. Our generation is the one that they're targeting, even though they've ignored us forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a cool time to have something that is focused on us, whether it is.
Yeah. Well, that's what got me hooked into the show, is just the stories, how relatable they are to, you kind of, when you're growing up, you think that your world's the only world, and that, and you hear all these parallel stories of, well, that was what we were doing in my hometown, and they were doing it in Dubuque, Iowa, or, Ann Arbor, Michigan, or, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And, it's, I always refer to our generation as the last great childhood, because, it was pre-tech.
Yeah.
But we're excited for tech. We love to use tech. I mean, come on, we're on a podcast right now.
Right.
But we played outside. We collected baseball cards. We
Barbies. You look at Barbies.
Right. We did Little League. My folks dropped me off and would come pick me up. They weren't, they had that luxury. It wasn't sitting there for hours and watching games. And it was the last great era of being a kid, in my opinion.
I think that's true. I think there's two sides of being the kid too, because there's the enjoying what we had and then not thinking about where we were going.
Right.
And it's been interesting to look at the sort of dichotomy of that with our mostly not guests. We have a couple guests here and there because there's 4 of us, so it's a lot of stuff to get through. But Chris grew up in the Midwest. I grew up on the East Coast. Lori grew up in LA, and Courtney grew up everywhere, including out of the country. And so seeing where those things happen, like we didn't even think about jobs, or Courtney did. We didn't think about money. We didn't think about, frankly, the passing of our parents, because that's our life at that point. So it was very self-indulgent in a lot of ways, but I think we were also pretty serious kids because of it. And I love the fact you mentioned technology, because I think we're the first generation that grew up without it and they're living with it. Like millennials are digital natives. We grew up before there was an email. Someone actually is confused when I say that I used to get online when I was 11 years old, because they don't know what a bulletin board system is. But that's or CompuServe's CB simulator when we had it. But that's where we were in our early teens. And now
you must have been rich. I didn't have any of that stuff. Wow.
I watched War Games, and I really wanted War Games his rig, even if it didn't mean anything. My parents had one of those old Betamaxes, and once they got rid of the Betamax,
we had a Betamax.
Yep. It didn't even work anymore, but I just put it by my desk so it looked like Matthew Broderick's rig.
So cool.
So I had that, but I didn't have friends.
Oh, well, this is taking a turn.
Well, I mean, I'm an only child, so it's like I'm an only child. I'm an introvert, so I had all the stuff I wanted in my room, and then I'd go and have dinner with my parents because I liked adults versus kids. So it was an interesting childhood, and it's interesting to sort of talk to other people about it, because you think you're alone, and then you find out there's some similarities, and then you find out absolutely differences, because Chris had, I think, 3 siblings, additional siblings, brothers and a sister. And then Lori had 1 brother, younger brother, and I'm an only, and so is Court. And so it's like, those are big differences in how you grow. So I love the idea of when you just mentioned telling your parents come home when the lights come on, because most kids have that. My parents didn't let me do that because I don't know, they were just scared that I would go do something. So it was like, well, just go up to your room and go do something on your computer and then come down for dinner. Okay, we'll do that. So, but it's been cool to hang out and to meet people like you, to meet more Gen Xers, because we're a little hidden. Everyone focuses, like you mentioned, sandwich generation can be between those generations. It can also be raising a parent while you're raising a child.
Raising a parent.
Which often puts you between, in our age, you're a little younger than I am, but for me, my parents were silent generation, and I don't have kids, but if I had kids, they would be Gen Zers. So millennials, I write off a little bit because I don't understand millennials. But it's even when we were talking, I mean, I don't get too serious, but even when we're talking about grief, how my mother grieved was so entirely different than as a Gen Xer I grieved. And trying to dance around that while we're also trying to do very serious things, while we're trying to get funeral, while we're trying to figure out his will, or trying to do all that, takes a lot out of you. And you want to express that energy. I think someone actually just told me recently, we're a generation that had Oprah. So we talk. We had talk shows. My parents didn't talk about that stuff. And my mother is still a very above board human. And so there was a disconnect for that. And realizing that as you age is a little different than, my opinion of my parents when I was 15 versus my opinion of my mother when I'm 53. It changes, and those life things help move that along, unfortunately, for the good or for the bad. I think it's both, to be honest.
Yeah. We're going to get to that grief conversation here in a second. I do want to, while we're talking about raising our parents or taking care of them, well, we try to bring on professionals that have degrees and designations in certain areas. We just had Alice Heath on, who has a behavioral finance accreditation. We have CPAs and attorneys, and I'm a licensed advisor, but
I'm none of that. I'm none of that.
There's no professional when it comes to going through grief.
Right.
But I think that's what you are, especially based on the conversation that we had a few months ago. Was you were very open with me about it. So if you don't mind, I wanted to, kind of talk you first about, the path that you and your mom or that you took, when your dad was diagnosed, and what that, taking care of a parent what that experience was like for you.
It's an interesting conversation. I'm able to have it better. It's 9 months, 10 months. Oh, I couldn't have talked about this a couple months into it.
Sure.
My dad, first and foremost, was a physician. He was an orthopedic surgeon and a very professional guy, and he handled most of the details in my family. My mom had her own little account. She was a teacher. She had her own little stuff, but dad handled life.
Okay.
And I was used to dad handling life. And since the pandemic, my father and I would FaceTime every day. I don't know how it really began, but every single day we would talk for almost 3 years. So I got very close to him, even closer than I used to be. And again, I'm a daddy's girl.
Sure.
Just how it happens. When he was sick, we actually didn't know he was sick. So last June, he fell and he messed up his right knee. And he had issues on his left side. He had issues now on his right side because he actually tore the ACL in his right leg. But it wasn't healing. And he'd gone to a rehab. My mother's 80th birthday was the 23rd of July last year. So I went up to Philadelphia from DC right before her birthday. We broke dad out of the rehab, and we were going to wait for his the swelling to go down so he could have knee surgery. That was the plan.
Okay.
And he came home not good. We just couldn't figure it out because he he had just a knee injury and everything sort of started to go sideways. So he was home for about 10 days and he was getting worse and worse. And none of us thought what it actually was. So finally, we called a doctor. Again, if we ever want to talk about the healthcare system and how much money you have to spend to actually get a doctor, we got a concierge doctor who within an hour diagnosed my father, which he hadn't been diagnosed in 80 years. He was 84.
Okay.
He thought he had a stroke because everything that was an issue physically was on his right side. And it turns out that they took him to the hospital and they found a mass on the left side of his brain, a 3-centimeter mass that turned into a glioblastoma. And if your listeners don't know what that is, it is brain cancer. It is the worst possible brain cancer that never has a positive outcome. It's always a death sentence. And we sort of knew that a little bit. Dad knew, but he didn't share because he didn't want to scare us.
Okay.
So he had the initial surgery, which was to get a biopsy and to get the diagnosis. And that was August 4th. And right before then, I found out later, he contacted all of his people. He contacted his financial advisor and he contacted his lawyer and he contacted his accountant. And he said, is everything set? Because my dad had it all worked out. I didn't know that right away. I'm just sort of focused on, my God, my father is sick. He's got brain cancer. What does that mean?
Right.
He had to recover for 2 weeks in the hospital until they could start radiation because of the surgery. And they literally put a plate in his head. And then he had to go start radiation and chemo. He did not last very long with that. He did, I think, 3 radiations and like 5 days in a row of a chemo pill. And his body couldn't take it. And he ended up intubated and back in the hospital. And Mom at that point, there was a lot of denial. I think she really thought he could be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And she thought that this was one of those cancers that goes into remission, which sadly it doesn't. And I knew that. And then it became an issue of, oh my God, we're going to have to plan a funeral. And he's not going to make it. And I'm 52 years old, an only child, and I've had my parents all that time. There's a lot of Gen Xers and a lot of people who are younger than us who don't have both parents still. So it was like, wait a minute. How are we going to do this? And then how am I going to be left caring for my mother, who is very independent, but Dad kept her separate from a lot of the stuff. He even kept me separate from a lot of the stuff. A couple of years ago, I asked him to let the accountant take over his bills. He'd still know what it was.
Right.
He said, sure. And he never did. So it's a period of intensity because you're losing a parent. It's a period of, oh my God, we're going to have to get everything organized. You got to pay for all these things. Can they pay for it? Can they not pay for it? In retrospect, I can look at that and see those tasks. At the time, I couldn't. It was just so overly blinded. But it's in retrospect, he ended up back in the hospital. I was up there September 1st. Again, I come home for a couple of days, and he went on hospice right after that Labor Day, and lasted 6 days in hospice. And they took care of him, and they took care of my mother, and they took care of us. And the morning of September 11th, we get the phone call that he has passed. And everything goes sideways at that point because there's grief. And then I don't know how people go in Judaism. You're supposed to put someone on the ground as soon as humanly possible. And my parents are Jewish, but I'm Jewish.
Okay.
We didn't do that because the funeral home was like, you do what you got to do. He'll be fine. My dad did flowers. And so we wanted the weather to be beautiful and we wanted it to be as nice as it could be in September. So we waited and had a beautiful, crisp day 4 days later for his funeral. And then as Jews, you do Shiva, you sit Shiva, which is supposed to be 7 days. We did 1. And we did it the following day outside because of COVID.
Okay.
So all those things, you sort of have to change those rules a little bit and rely on someone else to make a decision for you, saying, this is what I think I want. Go ahead and do it. We didn't care about the money at that point. We probably should have, but it was like, what does Mom want for Dad?
Right.
And Dad couldn't.
Well, you said something there, those rules. And, again, I'm very, very blessed. Both of my parents are still with me.
Yeah.
But have experienced loss, have had friends pass away. And what my experience has been is when it comes to grief, there aren't any rules.
No, there aren't.
That's kind of the message we get to our clients. Your job is to grieve. Our job is to do everything, even when it comes to opening your mail. You grieve, we'll get to this.
Yep.
Because in that process, and I do it every day, I know how important money is, but in that process, in that moment, it's just money.
It's just money. And if you don't do too much during that period of time, I mean, you don't want to abuse it.
Right.
Sort of know where you need to be, what your edges are. I think that you're 100% right. That if you
be together, be with your people. It's funny. Anytime we go through that, I have a core group of 5 friends. Well, me and 4 other friends that we grew up together from the time we were in 2nd grade. We played Little League baseball together. We grew up, played basketball, graduated together. And my one friend always says when we're going through something like that, just stay together.
Yeah.
That's it. Just stay together. And that's what you have to do. You have to surround yourself with your people, and everybody's tribe is different. Some of it's family, some of it's friends, some of it's coworkers, some folks like to deal with it on their own. But when it comes to the grief, I've noticed experiencing that, all too often, especially with clients, the rules are tossed out the window.
Yeah, not only they tossed out the window, my mother got very worried about doing everything right.
All right.
And we had to be convinced by the professionals that my father contacted.
Yeah.
That if you miss a bill, you miss a bill. It's not the end of the world. It's you're getting things under control. We thought that we could get everything out of his name and everything updated in a month. It's not gonna happen. It's not even a year yet, and we still have his credit card going. I still have his phone number. I still have his phone. So it took I don't think my mother still is ready for it, because I finally gave in to that and said, okay, the professionals say we're cool. They have access to the bank account. They have access to his will. They have access to all these things. If they say, take a deep breath and you just be with your family, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that generation has a hard time trusting that. I mean, who knows? I can say in retrospect, I trusted it, but I don't know.
It is. And I want you to in a second talk about the role the financial advisor played, because you had mentioned you all had a wonderful experience with him. So I want to make sure that you talk about that. But typically it has been our experience that my profession can be quite punishing during that process.
Yeah, it can.
Insurance companies can be slow. Banks can be difficult to deal with. And I think that's where the older generation's lack of trust came from, was, all right, this money has now been transferred. Somebody's going to try to sell me a financial product.
Right.
And I don't want to be sold a financial product while I'm grieving. And quite frankly, having the mindfulness to know that is very important, because the decision, the conversation that happens 9 times out of 10 in our office when we're, especially with a spouse. Well, what would have he wanted? What would have she wanted me to do this? I'm going to do this because that's what she wanted. And that may have been what the deceased wanted, but you've got to keep your mind on your goals.
Right.
You've got to keep it has to be tunnel vision. And if you don't have that ability right now because you're grieving, the best thing you can do is nothing. Obviously pay your bills.
Right.
But you get what I'm saying. The best thing you can do is nothing. The market is always going to be there. The banks are always going to be there. There will be a financial product to buy. There will be a portfolio to use 6 months, 8 months, 10 months from now. You get through this with a clear mind, clear vision, when you can have your goals in front of you again, and then have a conversation about how to treat this money.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I know you're listening to the Monetary Mixtape because you want to learn about financial planning and wealth management. If you have any questions at the end, please head over to www.hoffmanwealth.com or look in the show notes to schedule a call with us.
I think that's the ideal that we strive for. And I know that we were lucky to have that. I know there are some people who aren't. and they get targeted.
Sure.
And I hate when I hear those stories that a grieving widow is forced to make decisions that maybe she didn't have to make.
Yeah.
You
I always
know?
find myself apologizing for our profession during that process because, we, maybe it's a feather in our cap. We try our best to be the antithesis to that story is, because, there's a stat in our profession. Almost 90% of advisors lose the spouse when one passes away. And I think it's for two reasons. One, kind of what, with your dad handling everything, now your mom's in control. And maybe your mom says, I never liked that guy. And it's probably because he talked to your dad and didn't talk to the spouse. Other is, I don't want to be sold a financial product, so I'm going to leave. And, that stat to me is, obviously as an advisor, it's troubling, but it just tells me that as a profession, we need to be doing a better job. And I think we are. Tell me a little bit about the experience you had with your advisor or your dad's advisor and what was so wonderful about it.
I think what's good about it is my whole family has the same set of financial people. And I include financial people as the advisor who does the investing, as the estate attorney who actually went to sleepaway camp with my father and was one of his pallbearers.
Oh, man.
Right. And then the accountant who is in some form or another was involved with my family for decades because they had one agency. That agency, the guy retired, they gave it to someone else. They gave it. So this is the outcome of all those things. So these people have been with my family for decades. So we were never worried that they would take advantage. We were never worried we'd be sold something when we weren't ready. The closest thing to that was really doing the funeral home, and they didn't do that. It was my mother who likes these things. And I was looking at no one tells you that as a child, you may have to pick out your parents' coffin, for example.
Yeah.
And the costs that come with a funeral and that come with all that. Nobody tells you that. And my mother sort of didn't have a cap on that. And I maybe I should have kept it to her, but I didn't. We met new people there and you get a little bit of that distrust, but they were fabulous and they did exactly what we wanted them to do. So that suite of people helped us through in a time where your brain is shot and grief brain is real. I thought that you could get through it. When I eventually got back into therapy, I'm a creative, so that's a right brain person. Your left brain is sort of your executive function. She's like, just say goodbye to that. You're not going to have that for quite some time. Don't make any big major decisions. Do your art, but you're not going to be able to think through that. And it's 100% true. So having people that you can rely on to do that. So the people who we actually focus the most on ended up being the accountant.
Okay.
They are a small financial firm. My IRA and all that is with them. My father's stuff was with them. They are not sort of like multi-city in that sense. They're in Philadelphia, so that I could speak to a human, and they knew my father. And so they had quarterly meetings where they would do a Zoom and they would talk about their finances. So I could say, this is what's happening. Dad's in the hospital. He's going to pass. Can you, for example, just add me as a beneficiary? If I'm not already, make sure I'm a beneficiary. And they did it. They didn't even ask any questions. We didn't need a death certificate at that point.
Yeah.
So there were things like that helped us, and to know that when the time came, they'd be there. The accountant is the one who made the biggest difference on an ongoing basis with my mother, because we joke that it takes 5 of us to do what one man did, because he knew where his bills were, and he knew what his monthly what was coming in. He was retired. He actually officially retired when he was 80, and he died at 84. He did a lot of lawyer representation. I forget what it's named, when you go and you're a doctor and you testify and you're an expert witness. He did a lot of that stuff even into 80.
Okay.
So he knew where his money was coming from. He knew where certain things were. He had some bills that were paid auto. So some that never came paper, it just came to his email. Some that were paid, or, he just had that all in his head.
Yeah.
And we never got that out. Like, I didn't know that. We found that out as time went on. And the accountant knew some of it, but had great tips. Like, if you can get into his email, get into his account, make everything paper, and then send us the paper, because then
Smart.
they could sort of put the things together. My father died on the 11th of September, and I stayed in Philadelphia until the 1st of October so that all those people could come see mom.
Okay.
And I wanted to be present for the meeting when the will was read and when the accountant came in and when we got on the phone with the financial people to know what we had to do for the next year. And so when they showed up, they're like, yeah, your father called us and said, when I pass, you've got to handle Michelle's bills. My mother's name is Michelle. My father was William. Was your name? Same name. That made a big difference because she had started while he was in the hospital to do the bills.
Yeah.
And she's like me. I'm a very creative soul. She's a classics teacher. Numbers no bueno.
Yeah.
And it was all numbers, and it was all, she had to double check, and she had checks. She was still doing checks, and some things were paid automatically and some weren't. So that was a relief to know that they were going to order another checkbook. They were going to send all the bills, or mom was going to collect all the bills, and then every 2 weeks take them, and someone was going to go through them with her. Things like taxes, to know when your taxes were going to hit.
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff mom knew existed, but she never had to do it, and she would never give me the freedom to do it because she's in control.
Right.
So that team was really important. The estate attorney probably did the least in some ways, but did the most in some ways too, because as we got past the initial passing, my father had made my mother beneficiary on everything, which meant that the will was unnecessary. And that's unusual. And you probably deal with any people coming in with estate planning, and you have to go to probate, and then you have to, prove the death, and you need death certificates, or you have to wait until that comes out of probate. You got to file with the county. You got to do all this crap. My dad took care of that, which I don't think happens to a lot of people my age, that we have to go through the house. We have to go through, your bank account can't be released because the dead person is gone, and then it's locked. He had put my mother's name on their bank accounts. So it was just normal, really, at that point. And it just became, okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to do this? How are you going to make sure that your spending is cool with what dad spent on his bills, and then knowing what the bills were? The accountant and all these people gave me tips about where to look for things. That was hugely helpful. Once my brain sort of was processing a little bit more, I actually made a spreadsheet for him. And I'd say, this is this vendor. This is what dad pays. This is the date that it goes. That's critical to be able to figure that stuff out. So I will always be grateful for them to take their time with us, and to know that I was supporting my mother as best as I could at that point. But there was a speed to go.
Yeah.
They didn't, like, day one say, okay, here you go.
Right. Sign here, sign here, sign here.
No.
Right.
No.
And I'm glad to know that was your experience. I'm glad to know that, I've said on this show a lot, I don't know any bad advisors. I don't know any. And I'm glad that you had that same experience. Maybe it's just the circle that I keep is not in that mindset to hurry up and sell another financial product. So, So I want to ask one more question. And when you're dealing with all this, you're a very driven woman. You have, your podcast, you have your website, you have your own profession, your own money. How do you keep track of your own goals while you are, dealing with the grief, dealing with taking care of dad, dealing with taking care of mom? And I'm sure there's some emotions or feelings that go along with that. How was that for you?
I'm going to be really honest. I didn't do it.
Okay.
I couldn't. I mean, I trusted, I didn't make any big moves. Let's put it that way. I trusted the people who I was with. I had the same vendor, the same people my father had.
Right.
And I relied on my father a lot for ideas. Frankly, he had maybe about 6 months before he passed, he sent me one of those, I guess it's a calendar. I don't know. He said his father gave it to me, he could write things in it.
Okay.
Okay, whatever he wants to do. I went out on my own 3+ years ago, and my dad supported me in it. And when I had to pay my first tax bill, which was significant because I'm now independent,
Yeah.
He was like, I'll tell you what my father said to me, which is like, you made the money, you got to pay the taxes. I'm sorry. The bigger that your tax bill is, the bigger that your money is. So without that, I was a bit lost.
Yeah.
So I didn't make any big changes.
Smart.
I still haven't. I'm with these people. We are so focused on mom that I put my stuff to the back seat. I know how much money I need to make to get through it. The only
Okay.
thing that I focused on was, did I have enough money in the bank if I needed to take off for a period of time?
Gotcha.
Which I did.
Good.
And then it's the question of, how do I get that back up? What are your numbers? What are your basic expenses? How can you just coast until your brain is right again?
Yeah.
So I didn't do as much as I really had hoped to do. In my little brain, I'm hoping the best that I can keep doing. It'll be there when I'm ready to do it. It'll
Yeah.
be there when I'm ready to sort of get back up to that level, but I'm not. So it's just too emotional and it's too worrisome, to be
Yeah.
honest. It just really is. But I have faith that I've been smart up until this point. My father sort of instilled in me those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning more and more about the things that he put inside my brain for managing your money or managing your life, more than I thought. And so that has helped me sort of have the faith that I'm doing the right things. And I'm just going to cross my fingers that it keeps doing that.
Well, and it sounds like you have a group of great professionals in your corner that are there to, give advice at your pace,
Yeah,
and at your speed and when in your comfort level, which is ultimately what is important.
Yeah,
for you and for them to be doing.
100%. And I wish everybody had that. I know a lot of people don't. I have that history. I have that shared history. So knowing that those are people who are willing to be there in my corner, or to say things like, financial advisor, there was one with two products. I have one IRA and another account. The existing account wasn't generating what they thought it would.
Okay.
They decided to change the product, and they contacted me saying, "We just will let you know, you don't have to do anything. This is no longer going to be where we're going to put your money. We're going to move it over here for a short period of time. You'll have these three." As they pulled this one out, they told me exactly what they're going to be doing. I said, "Go for it."
Good. Well, and if you're listening, we're out there. There are good advisors. They're out there. Hopefully you're working with one. There are, stand-up professionals in this business, in this profession. It sounds like what your experience is the experience we tried to give our clients. So I'm glad you were taken care of. And as we wind up, I do want to say thank you for sharing all this. I know that could have been very emotional for you. It's tough to share, and I'm glad you're getting through it. I do want to give one more sort of public service announcement while we're winding up. We talk a lot about money. We want to see growth. We want to see, folks be fiscally responsible. We talked a lot about a lot of other stuff today. Just make sure that if you need to get help, you're getting it. You're talking with therapists. You're talking with your friends. You're talking with your spouse, your loved one, your brothers, your sisters, your kids, your parents. Please make sure that you're doing that. This is, like I said, what we're talking about is only our money. It's important. It's important to us. I know it's important to you all, but there's a lot of other things that are important. And one of them is got to be your mental health. So make sure if you take one thing from this, even mention talking with her therapist, please get that help. Remember what my buddy always says, stay together. That stuff is important. Keep your tribe together, talk to them, talk to the doctor. So I want to make sure I get that point across, because this can be some deep and heavy things that we go through. And I think Eve said it best, you get blinded by it and you don't know when you're going to see again.
And I think you actually bring up another really good point, that if you can talk to your parents about their wishes,
yes,
do it now.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, I'm grateful that we knew where most things were, but a lot of people don't. So if there's a lawyer and you need to know what their number is, get it. If there are accounts, I have one friend whose mother passed and everything was cool except one account that was hidden, and that had to go to probate, and they discovered that by accident. So know where everything is. My father, I picked on him actually a lot. He had a notes thing in his phone that had all of his passwords for everything. And I'm like, Dad, you can't put that in one place. And he's like, I'm doing it. And I would be home there and he's like, I'm signing up for Paramount Plus, add it to the file. And that thing is the most precious thing ever because I can get into his accounts now. So I know where his accounts are. I know how he logged into them. I could go when I log in, see what the last payment was, see if it's auto pay. So any way that you can get that, if you have the relationship with those parents, have the conversation. If you find out during that conversation that one doesn't know what the other one's doing, see if you can do all of them together. Because we were able to get through it because Dad trusted his team and I have the same team and they were willing to share with me what was going on. But some people don't have that. So, I think you're right. I think that knowing who your people are, they'll be different than you think they are, to be honest. They were for me. I thought 100%. Some people were going to be there and they weren't.
Yep.
This is the first time I've been able to talk about it and not cry. So thank you, because I'm able to talk about something that is very, very task-based.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that's too emotional. But the lessons that I'm learning from the people who I speak to, who in the beginning tended to be women who lost fathers, ironically.
Yeah.
And the things that they learned and the things that they found out or the things that they were ready to execute on vary. Some of them are like, I have no idea what's going on. Others like me, it was tax time. And I pulled together Google Docs for the accountant because he's my accountant.
Yeah.
And I can say, these are all the things we paid for Dad's care. You can put those, you can write those off the taxes. I mean, these are just little things that, again, you learn over time, but know how you can support the surviving spouse and know how you can support yourself as well. It's tough. Nobody wants to, this is a conversation that nobody wants to have, but we all have to have because it's going to happen.
Yeah. You're 100% right. It is tough, but it's necessary, and have them. That's the best I can do. And what have we learned from all the professionals we've had on here, Wendy? Have it right now. Get started right now. That's been the message that the college saving folks and the FAFSA guru, and they all say, start right now. Do it right now. If you hear this, wait till the end of the episode and then reach out, have the talk with your folks, have the talk with your advisors. It's important.
And it also it relates to your kids too, because we're talking about being a sandwich generation.
Right.
One of my co-hosts on the podcast changed everything that she did for her son based on what happened with her mother. Mm-hmm. So when her mother passed away, the things that she learned changed what she and her husband did for the child that they're rearing. And hopefully that'll stick with him as he grows. So it's you're never in a vacuum during this stuff. And the more that you can sort of have these difficult conversations, or she even had a suggestion to Google the checklist of the things that you should ask your family about. You know, the most basic is.
I think we even have one of those on our website. I'll make sure I put that.
Do that.
If we have that, I'll make sure we put that in the show notes and with a link to that.
It's important.
Eve, we have to wrap up now. Wendy's giving me the hook. If our folks want to check out your podcast, where do they find it? How do they touch base with you and learn more about GenX Stories?
You can literally find us on our brand new website, genxstories.com. You can find all of our episodes for the last 4 seasons. You can see about all of our folks. You can contact us directly if you'd like to, if you want to follow up with the show, or you want to have an idea to come on the show. You can also check out some stuff at our Instagram, which has slowed down because of what's been going on, but it's at genxstories.com on Instagram. Those are our best ways to get in touch with us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience, sharing your story. As always, if you want to get in touch with us, HoffmanWealth.com is our website. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And there's Will Hoffman AIF. Find me, chat me up. If you have a question, feel free to reach out. Wendy, you want to take us home?
I do. And thank you guys. And thank you for joining us today on Monetary Mixtape. Please like, follow, and share with your friends. Until next time, I'm Wendy McConnell.
Don't bounce just yet. The street lights haven't come on. Thank you for listening to the Monetary Mixtape Podcast. If you thought this episode was dope, then click the follow button to be notified when we drop a new episode. Visit our website at hoffmanwealth.com or give us a call at 724-522-5411. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Hoffman Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Hoffman Wealth Management are separate entities from LPL Financial. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly.